Welcome into Floyd Treat's Finest. He is Kevin Sweeney from Sports Illustrated, the Field of 68 After Dark. I am Jack Grossman, part of the Field of 68 Podcast Network. Louisville on a roll right now. Like, subscribe, do all those things. There's never been a better time to get in on this podcast. Quite literally, because I'm pretty sure the podcast started during the Carly Jones year in 2021. So Louisville's been quite bad throughout the entire run of this with both Jeff Greer and then myself and Coach Lieberman taking over. So a lot of fun. Like, subscribe, do all that stuff I usually forget to say. But Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, however you're consuming this on Twitter, I'm at Jack Grossman 97. Kevin is at CBB_Central. You find all this stuff over at Sports Illustrated as well. Kevin, thanks so much for coming on, man. Really appreciate the time.
Yeah, appreciate you having me, Jack.
Anytime, anytime. Good to get you on the pod. Louisville gets a huge win against Pittsburgh. Really cap off what I kind of thought would be the defining stretch of their season if they were going to be able to make anything out of the season. You looked at between December 7th and January 11th. That's where they had all their big quad one opportunities. They didn't deliver too much early with Ole Miss to Kentucky, but they absolutely have in their last 6 games, getting 2 quad 1 wins against Pittsburgh and at Florida State at the end of December, 2 more quad 2 wins, and really hitting on all cylinders since the new year started. But nothing has stood out more than this Pittsburgh game where they get a quad 1A win. Pitt's 27th in the net. They're a good team challenging Louisville and that other conglomerate of teams that really Louisville's just kind of beaten all of the Carolinas, the Clemsons, all these teams. Got to slide in there behind Duke as the second best team in the ACC. But what stood out to you specifically in that Pittsburgh game?
Man, it was a gritty performance. Like to take some punches against a very good Pitt team on the road that has tremendous guards. Like I was just so impressed with how they handled adversity in a huge game. And their execution in the final 4 minutes of the game was just far better than Pitt's, right? You think about some of the mistakes that Pitt made. Louisville took advantage of all of them. And part of that was just big time shot making by Rain Smith, right? Like, it tends to make a defense look bad when a guy can't miss. But, I felt like maybe Pittsburgh didn't do a great job with him. Like that's, the baseline out of bounds play gets the three in the corner. Like, kind of know where the ball's going. But that's good coaching by Pat Kelsey. Like, you put your guys in your best position to win and hope that your guys who can go make shots make shots. And that's what they've done during this entire hot streak. I thought they got timely stops when they needed it. Navigated the foul trouble with Hadley really well. And I actually thought that James Scott was excellent in this game. Like against a Pitt team that doesn't have super physical bigs, I thought he really brought an edge and a toughness that impacted the game. So this group's coming along. I know it's in different form than I think you probably would have expected in the preseason, just because Kelsey's team's so known for let's cycle through as many bodies as we can, and we strengthen our depth. But they've kind of got an iron 5 or iron 6 going right now, and it's working as well as you could have hoped. Absolutely monster win.
Yeah, big one for sure. James Scott, just piggybacking off that, he's kind of continued his trend we talked about on the last podcast. He struggled so much early without trouble early in the season, and he's really come on the last 5, 6 games or so. I don't think it's a coincidence that Louisville's been playing their best basketball when James Scott's been able to stay on the court, stay out of foul trouble, be able to give them quality minutes, and be such a lob threat under the basket, be a good rebounder, be able to be the only semblance of rim protection this team has, even before all the injuries that's kind of forced them to go to that 5-6, technically 8-man rotation now that Traore is back and they work Anselm eBay in there a little bit. But James Scott's been huge. Rain Smith has been phenomenal for Louisville. He's you mentioned it off the baseline out of bounds play. I think there's 2 plays a game that they're able to get Rain Smith a bucket out of either a baseline out of bounds or a sideline out of bounds. They did it twice in the last 8 minutes in that Pittsburgh game. And they run such good stuff for Rain Smith, man. I mean, you think about, he gave him a 3 out of the timeout to give him a 2-point lead with 2:30 left. He hit the last 3 he hit was off of a ghost screen where he screened a guy on the elbow, was able to flare out. It was really, really, really good stuff that Pat Kelsey's run, especially for Rain Smith, to find ways to get him out because everyone knows he's trying to shoot the ball. He shot more threes. I saw this morning. Chris Hadfield had the tweet. He shot more threes than any other power conference player in college basketball. He's hitting 39% of them. Everyone knows what he's trying to do, and they're still able to free him up for 8, 9, 10 attempts a game. It's insane.
Yeah, and look, I think it helps to have multiple guys on the floor that are good passers. Hepburn and Edwards both can create and did that at their their previous destinations. Chucky has certainly taken it to another level at Louisville. It helps to have good sets. I think it helps to have, I think it opens things up to have a guy diving to the rim like Scott. So much, it's funny. Everyone talks about spacing nowadays, and it's all like centered around, oh, like if our center shoots a million threes, we have the greatest spacing on the planet. I would argue that a lot of times, like that traditional kind of 4 out, 1 in spacing winds up being more effective than 5 out. And Louisville has some options to get to that with Scott's ability to handle the ball a little bit, be a DHO guy, be a screener. You can stick Hadley in the dunker spot. He can really go anywhere on the floor. And I just think I think the floor is almost more open for someone like Rain Smith to run off screens and run off actions right now than it was when you've got Case and Pryor trying to handle the ball out there, and you've got Waterman who was playing more earlier in the season. I think in a lot of ways, they've sort of just by accident kind of stumbled into the lineup that really works with this group, which has enough size and physicality. It has dynamic shot creators in Hepburn and Edwards, and then shooting in Smith. Obviously, he's come along here lately. So yeah, it's a potent lineup, and again, the execution in the final stretch of that game against a very good Pitt team. Hard not to be impressed with how they handled some of those moments, and I think have built confidence over the last couple weeks of like, all right, we can do this, right? Like we can close games. We've been in these moments, and I think some of those wins, even like UTEP and Eastern Kentucky, like those games do help. Like for your own psyche, like we're in this spot, we're gonna be fine. We've been here before, and I think you felt that against Pitt in a big way.
Yeah, and it's huge that they did win those games. And we keep mentioning it on the podcast. So have you brought it up? The fact that they were able to survive those games not only builds confidence, it keeps those little black holes of a quad four, quad three loss on there also. So hurts the metrics a little bit to only beat EKU by 2. UTEP, they're a good mid-major team by 3, but it's a lot. You can live with it when you go on a run like they've gone on recently, and also you'd have a nice little 0 in that quad 3, quad 4 loss column for sure. But I want to ask you this too, because you mentioned it. They closed the game well against Pitt. They hit 4 of their last 5 field goals, were able to outlast the Panthers. You go back to the Clemson game. They ended the first half on a 14-1 run, ended the game, I think, on a 13-3 run. The Carolina game, they ended on a 13-1 run. The Virginia game, they ended on something like a 15-2 run, something like that. How important is it, not just at the end of games, but at the end of halves as well, for Louisville to kind of build momentum going to the locker room, kind of talk about that middle four that people like to talk about so much in football, but definitely applies in basketball as well.
Yeah, last four, first four are always huge, and they swing entire kind of sentiments of games. And I think Louisville's been really good in those. I do think the style that Kelsey brought, if you look back to his teams at Charleston, like they've always had some spurt ability. Like they've had the ability to put points up in a hurry and put pressure on the game, swing the game in minute, 2 minute segments. And I think you're starting to see that. Like I thought the 14-0 run in the Pitt game was
Yeah.
really important, right? Like you're on the road, you kind of get punched in the mouth, you spot them basically a 10-point lead, and here you come ripping away with 14 straight points. And it's sort of an announcement like, we're here, man. Like we're not going, we're going to be in this game. Like you're going to have to beat us. And that's what like that game was there for Pitt to win, but Louisville was going to make Pitt earn it. And I think there's a lot to be said for that, especially in college basketball.
Yeah, I'd say in a lot of games Louisville's lost even. I mean, other than Ole Miss and Tennessee, where they kind of got boat raced, which they did. There's no way to get around it. But you think of like Oklahoma, that was a game that went down to their wire. Duke, that was a game that, yes, Duke ended up winning by like 11 or so, but Louisville came out punched early and never really went away. They faded a little bit because they fatigued, and that was kind of the height of all the injuries. But Kentucky as well, a game that they lost, but they really made Kentucky have to earn it and have to keep battling off punches. And it took a takeaway, scoring 9 points in the last 2 minutes, and Lamont Butler having the game of his life for them to survive that one. So Louisville's done a good job of that, but we've seen those turn in instead of kind of doing a moral victory Monday, Pat Kelsey's first year. We're just happy to be competing, to actually coming through and winning these games, the last six games, which probably, as you mentioned, could have started with being able to close out the UTEP and Eastern Kentucky games.
Yeah. I mean, 100%. Like those were massive, right? And look, I think there's a lot to be said, and I don't think you knew at that point that like this run was coming, but um, there's a lot to be said for just like living to fight another day, like
Yeah.
staying in the fight, because there were a lot of places where this thing could have gone off the rails and it didn't. And you got to a point where you could kind of reset and start finding it, and now here they are.
Yeah, I'll say the thing that puts them in a tough spot is they're going to be a lot of living to fight another day type of games coming up with the rest of their schedule. This was Louisville's schedule. I don't know if you realize this, Kevin, is was so damn front loaded this year.
Yeah.
Not only with, the fact that they went out and challenged themselves to the battle for Atlantis, Tennessee, Ole Miss, Kentucky, and all that stuff, the non-con, but they got in the ACC. Duke was their first game of the year in league, and they only play them once. Carolina was their third game, even though Carolina's been down, but just on paper, going at the start of the year, you figured, okay, they're going to be better than what they've been. That's on New Year's Day. At Florida State, which right now is a quad one win, was your second game in league. And then you got Clemson, Virginia twice before we knew Virginia would be a piling dumpster fire, and Pittsburgh, all before, January 18th. I mean, and really take the Virginia thing out of it, all before January 11th. Louisville now has 13 regular season games the rest of the year, and 8 of them are quad three games. One of them's a quad four game against Miami. I mean, they only have 2 more quad one games, and one of them against Pittsburgh. Pitt's 27th in net right now. I'm not confident that'll still be a quad one game by the time March 1st rolls around. So Louisville had to do all of their work in for their NCAA tournament resume by really January 11th. And that became even tougher once Cason Pryor gets hurt and's out for the year. Corn Johnson's out for the year, to where it's like, okay, this became the critical stretch for them to actually deliver it. I would argue they've done enough to where, as long as they don't fall off and lose some games they're not supposed to the next few months, they're not only an NCAA tournament team. I'm seeing them. I mean, you do bracketology for SI, so you can give me your thoughts on them. That's, I want your thoughts on them, but I think they've done enough to where they're not only an NCAA tournament team, but maybe even in like the 7-8 range as of right now.
Yeah, like I think the as of right now thing is
Yeah.
the critical sentence, right? And that's the thing that's so challenging is when you talk about how weak the schedule is in February. Like if you're in the Big Ten or you're in the SEC, you're going to just keep stacking these good wins, even if you're losing while you do it,
Yeah.
right? You go 500 in the SEC in February, you got 3 or 4 quad one wins. That might be Louisville's entire total for the year when it's all said and done, right? Like that's the challenge that you run into. So and for Louisville, any loss could be very damaging, right? Like stumble on the road at BC, and all of a sudden it's
Yep.
like you're kicking yourself, right? So that's the issue. The good thing is that if you could navigate this stretch, you theoretically should be able to navigate at Georgia Tech, at BC, home Miami, at NC State. At no, like maybe you slip up once. Like we're not expecting them to go, 17-3 in the league. Like that's just not realistic. But finding ways to protect home court is going to be critical. Finding ways to avoid a disastrous road loss. Like you could lose at Notre Dame.
Yep.
That would probably not be the end of the world.
But like Syracuse tomorrow
Yeah,
night on Tuesday night, you
I,
can't lose
I
that game.
yeah, got to beat Syracuse.
Yeah.
Syracuse is very bad. Syracuse is really bad basketball team. So, yeah, look, I think they're in a good position. I think obviously you have to hope that the Indiana win ages. They've sort of teetered here, as you well know, Jack. West Virginia win is looking better and better. But yeah, if you can look up and say, all right, we have no bad losses in the non-conference. We have 2 legit wins over potential NCAA tournament teams. We've won at Pitt. We beat Clemson. We beat Carolina. And we can avoid the bad ones.
Yeah. Which I'll say this, and it's no secret to you, Kevin. It's no secret to anyone that's listened to the podcast. It's no secret back to my radio days. I'm an Indiana grad. So I watch them about as much as I watch Louisville. And I can confidently say I do not think that's going to be a quad one win. That is a team. I mean, everyone kind of did the is Indiana back? Have they turned a corner thing? No, they had not. It was because they beat Rutgers and USC at home, the bottom of the Big Ten. They had barely beaten Winthrop and Chattanooga before that. Yes, the Penn State win was nice, but we saw the true colors against Iowa. I don't have any faith in that cracking the top 50 and being a quad one win for Louisville, which would be very beneficial for them. I think the rub comes though because Indiana is one of those teams that has a lot of quad one chances to where, in theory, if they did get their stuff together, they would have a good chance of becoming a quad one win. Again, I just don't trust them. But I look at Clemson and North Carolina, who are sitting at 37 and 38 in net. Is there any chance that either of those two teams could jump up into the quad ones? A lot tougher being in the ACC because you're not going to get the quad one wins, and you're going to have to do a similar thing to what Louisville's done over these past couple weeks of Louisville jumped from 60 to 35th in the net, not just because they were getting quad one and quad two wins, but because they were absolutely, not blowing out teams. They did blow out Virginia by 20, but winning games by 12, 13, 14 points a lot of these games. That's really where you're going to help your net rankings a lot in the ACC. Is there any chance that North Carolina and Clemson could do that, or are they just kind of where they are for the most part because of the weakness of the ACC?
I mean, I think it's definitely possible. I think one thing that we probably underestimate the possibility of is some of these bad ACC teams just like completely flopping, right? Like, Georgia Tech got destroyed by SMU on Saturday. Georgia Tech's still 103 in Ken Palm. I'd have to look and see what their net is, but like there's room to keep falling if a season sort of goes off the rails, right?
Yeah, Miami's already done that.
I don't think it's a controversial statement to say that Miami sort of quit on the year, right? Yeah. Like Miami, I don't know what their against the spread record is, but it can't be good. Like every time I look, I'm like, that number feels a lot lower than it should be, and they lose by more than that. I'm like, oh, well, of course. Like they're really, really bad. Like that's where we're at with Miami, and I don't think I think it's totally possible that we get two or three more of those, and it's on Carolina and Clemson and them to beat the brakes off these teams. I always, I understand when people say, oh, there's just nothing they could do. They don't get to play as big game, many big games, et cetera, et cetera. Like you got to handle the business in front of you. And I know it's hard. It's not fun to say, oh, we have to win by 19 today. Otherwise we're not going to help our net enough, but like, I think if I was Carolina Clemson, that's how I'd be approaching things. Like, all right, we got to pop some people. And I do think Carolina's playing better. I think that will help them. I think Clemson's a good basketball team. I think they have the ability to rebound and beat people up. So yeah, I certainly wouldn't rule it out. I will also note from a bigger picture perspective that I'm curious to see how the quadrant buckets impact selection this year. Not to say that they won't. They'll certainly be in the mix, but there are some new elements this year with the wins above bubble metric.
Yep.
Which, essentially
Louisville's been great this year for whatever that's worth.
The goal of wins above bubble for the uninitiated essentially is to give every win and every loss some value, right? Instead of saying, oh, well, we beat number 1 and we beat number 30 and it means the same according to the quadrants. Like, all right, like every result now means something. So yes, if you're Louisville, did just beating Virginia like run things up for you? No, but does it help incrementally? Yes. And the hope would be by running, putting up a very strong number in ACC play, whether it's 14 wins, 15 wins, 16 wins, like that you position yourself great in the wins above bubble. And just for posterity's sake, right now, Louisville is 22nd in wins above bubble, which is really strong. So that would be my hope for Louisville, instead of having to sit there and be like, man, like if only Carolina can, win by 26 tonight and all of a sudden they're quad one. Like I think the hope would be that the holistic resume looks pretty good for the Cardinals.
Yeah, it definitely does. I do wonder, just kind of on the quad system itself, it's definitely better than the old RPI system. That's for sure. I do wish it would be a little tweaked, and I think the bubble metric's a good start to that. But you're telling me, and I think this is the root of the problem, that if someone were to beat Auburn at home, that would mean the exact same in the quad system as Louisville beating Florida State on the road. That doesn't make any sense to me. And to me, I like the quad 1A segment of it. I think that does a good job. Job of I think 1 through 15 at home is what it is, 1 through 30 on the road. I think there's too much. I get it. It's very hard to win on the road in college basketball, but I think there's too much of disparity there between home games and road games. Like again, that Florida State win's a very good win for Louisville because of how the quad system's set up. They're 71st in net. Will they stay in that top 75? We don't know. But to me, I think a better way of distributing it would be like a top 30 at home, top four or top 40, 50, 60, maybe between home, neutral, and road instead of 30, 50, 75. I think there's too much credit for just simply winning a road game against a mid team, to be completely honest. And I get it, it's very, very hard to win on the road in college basketball, especially, what we've seen in the SEC so far with a lot of the home teams winning, what we traditionally have seen the Big Ten the past few years. But to me, I think there's just too much. We've gone too much in that way, and I think the ball metric will help with that. But I'd like to see it condensed a little bit.
Yeah, I agree. I think that no system's perfect, right? That's
Right.
the reality of it. And I think the hope is that by presenting more data points and more options, then the committee can work through. Because theoretically, again, I don't think beating Florida State and beating Auburn were the same thing in the eyes of the committee. But
Right.
when you were sitting there and doing, oh, let's do blind resume time, right? Like then all of a sudden that's the stuff you get, right? And that's
Yeah.
and that's the challenge, right? And so that's why we have things like Quad 1A and we have all the metrics and whatever. And I think if you're a team like Louisville that could be on the bubble, your hope is just to sort of make your resume as bulletproof as possible. Have a couple of those strong wins, right? Pitt on the road is a really strong win. Have no bad losses. Have strong metrics in the predictive and in the results based.
Yeah. Which
All
they
those
do right
things
now.
are just
Yeah.
checks. And there's not a lot of stuff right now that you look at them and you say, here's why they shouldn't be a tournament team. And the goal really of the next 6 weeks, as much as anything, is to not present any of that case. Like keep winning the games you're supposed to win, keep looking like a tournament team, and see where the chips fall.
So if they're able to do that, though, let's say, because again, we're not, no one's expecting them to go perfect. They're gonna lose a game sometime between now and March 8th, whenever the season ends. It's going to happen. Even I'll put it this way, even if they don't, even at 19-1, that might not be enough to win the league with the way Duke's playing right now. But which that's not a knock on Louisville by any means there. But where do you see? Because again, it's tough because I was looking at like Georgia, for instance. It's kind of similar Louisville and Ken Palm right now. I believe they're like 34th and 35th, or like 35th, 36th in Ken Palm when I was looking last night. But they have 10 more quad one games. Missouri has 12 more quad one games. Even a team like Indiana has like 10 more quad one games. There's a lot of teams that both where Louisville is right now and from behind him that, as you mentioned earlier, has that chance to really pass them up the next couple months in quality wins. Where do you think Louisville could potentially end up if they're able to avoid having two, three, four catastrophic losses?
Yeah,
And how many of those losses can they afford to have would be the other part of that question.
I would say ideally no quad 3 or 4.
Right.
Right? Again, some of the road games are possible if you got tripped up by like Wake, who's playing much better right now, looks much more like a tournament team than they did in November and December. Like those would be just fine. You could probably afford one or two of those, but the Miamis, the BCs, the Virginia Techs, like the Cals, like you got to find a way. Got to find a way.
Yeah.
As far as seeding, it's hard. It's so early. The ranges are pretty wide. I'd be surprised if they could kind of knock down the door above like a 7. I think that 7 through 11 range feels like where you'd expect it to end up, assuming they do make it. And I'm sure I don't need to tell you that would be quite the win, all
Yeah.
things considered.
Would that make Pat Kelsey the coach of the year nationally if they're a 7 seed?
I don't think so, just from the perspective of I think I think the rebuilding story doesn't get told quite as much now because of the portal. Like it's all his guys. It's not like
Yeah.
he didn't take the players from Kenny Payne and flip it into this, right? Like it's a totally different. But he would have earned a spot in the conversation. I think the injuries and whatnot also certainly make a case. He'd certainly be in that ACC Coach of the Year conversation. Although, if Duke and Shire post a pretty crazy number, then all of a sudden that gets tough. But I mean, you can't. He's done an incredible job, all things considered, especially with how the first month went, with all the injuries, with everything. Like you couldn't have asked for any more. He's done a heck of a coaching job.
How surprising is, especially considering all the injuries and everything, and the fact that again, they're 12-5 right now. They were 12-52 the last 2 years under Kenny Payne. This how surprising is it that? Because I think I kind of expected them to be kind of a bubble-ish type team, and they still end up might being that, but I don't think I saw 12-5 to be completely honest. And especially like there was a lot of doom and gloom after Pryor and Johnson got hurt. They were kind of have to play the 7-man rotation. I thought it was too early to call it quits on the season, but I was kind of worried they would dig themselves too big of a hole, and there was too little the ACC to kind of overcome that hole if they were to have done that. But what have you been your thoughts of how of Pat Kelsey's coaching job and just how surprising it is that they already have him in this spot?
It's funny. I want to say, and I have to look, I might be able to pull this while I talk. I want to say I literally had them preseason as like the 34th or 36th ranked team in the country.
Fair, yeah,
And that's where they are. So
yeah,
from that perspective, I had 31, right? So okay, great, and
yeah.
30 ACC. So like I'm not thinking he's meeting those expectations. But number one, those were a hard expectation to put on a guy. Like that was probably close to the ceiling. And then obviously to deal with the injuries and everything that they've gone through is just super challenging. So again, I think he deserves a ton of credit from the standpoint of you know, just keeping the belief in these guys and continuing to pour into them. They had the shooting struggles early on. They had the injuries. I think some humbling home results, especially, Tennessee and Ole Miss. Um, give them a lot of credit for kind of staying in the fight and tweaking and finding ways to adapt and put guys in position to win. And those guys have made plays here the last couple of weeks. We'll see if they continue it. But all things considered, I think he's done a pretty phenomenal job of giving this team its best chance to win.
We'll turn nationally a little bit here because I want to hit on a couple things with you. First of all, is the SEC because yeah, I'm partial. I grew up in Louisville. Obviously we're doing a Louisville podcast. I'm very partial to the late 2000s, early 2010s Big East. Um, that that to me has always been the gold standard as far as college basketball conferences go. But this year's SEC I think has a real chance. I know this isn't a hot take at this point. It's been very circular. I know you guys were talking about it. I think a little bit on the Field 68 last night, but this SEC very well might be the best basketball conference we've ever seen in the sport, both in terms of the top end national championship Final Four contenders with Auburn, Jedi Broom obviously hurt now. Tennessee's been great. Alabama, I think, is coming on really big right now. Kentucky's, been fantastic as well. And also the depth in terms of, South Carolina, who's the worst team in the league, almost beating Auburn on their home court on Saturday. And every game that they're playing is a quad one, quad two game. A lot of them just all quad ones. Is the SEC the best basketball conference of all time?
That feels a little strong for me. Maybe it's just because I'm not one for the hot take.
Fair.
But they are. I mean, it's been incredible. Like, I mean, they have four of the top eight in Ken Palm, and then they have Texas A&M, Kentucky, Mississippi State, Ole Miss. Like, come on,
Yep.
man.
Yep.
It's like
Florida's been
your
awesome.
your second tier is like a good enough group to win any major conference. So yeah, it's loaded. I think the bottom is really strong. I think that's the other thing that I think people probably won't appreciate because eventually these teams will lose games, right? Like if Texas is 5-13 this year in the league, like that says something because Texas has a top 10 pick and good transfers and size and pretty much dominated non-conference play. Like blew a lot of people out. Like only lost for UConn and Ohio State. Like if that team is the worst team in the league or one of the worst teams in the league, that says something. So it's really, really high level. I had a coach in the SEC text me. He said NBA, EuroLeague, SEC, and I said, "All right, dude, shut up. Like let's not blow it up too much." Like that's the feeling. Like it's as
Yep.
high level as it gets, and I don't think it's going away. I think obviously this year may be a little bit special just because you had some returners like Broom and Sears and Clayton that don't come around all the time, but man, it's as good as it gets, and the coaching is top notch. The talent level is really good, and I think now that it's rolling like this, it's going to continue to snowball in recruiting, and they're going to continue to get the best players. You're going to see the continued investment, financially in getting players at a high level and saying, all right, it's cool for us to be good at basketball, things like that. So, yeah, it's an awesome college basketball league, and can't wait to watch the rest of the slate.
Yeah, like I live down here in Atlanta now, and I was talking to a friend of mine who could not give less of a crap about college basketball. And I ran into him yesterday, and he goes, Georgia basketball, they're good, huh? I'm like, yeah, how about that? Good for you. You're finally getting into it. But it's been a crescendo over the last handful of years of, they brought in the coaches, whether it be Bruce Pearl or Nate Oates or, Todd Golden, Rick Barnes. You can go way on and on down the list there of guys they've brought in. Chris Jansen, Mississippi State, obviously Mark Pope at Kentucky now. But they brought in the coaches. They have the financial investment that they get from the football contracts, and they're recruiting now. In the NIL, you said it might be a one-off that guys will stay. I think we've seen the trend now with NIL, not just in the SEC but nationally. Guys like Mark Sears Clayton that you mentioned, RJ Davis in North Carolina, Baycott before that, Edie, Trace Jackson Davis, Oscar Sheboy, Drew Timmy. We're seeing a lot of these guys stay in college basketball a lot longer now because they can make that money, even if they're transferring like Hunter Dickinson did from Michigan to Kansas, to where I don't know how much of a one-off that side of it is just because not just in the SEC but college basketball in general, because it's become more appealing to play in college basketball, which is a very good and healthy thing for the sport, contrary to popular belief for some. But I found it. I think it's here to say. I don't think it's going to be this insanely good every year. I'm with you on that. But the SEC is here to stay. They're not going away anytime soon because they have the resources, and it's kind of like Indiana in football this year. Once you realize it's fun, it's like, oh crap, we're going to try to do that again. That's great. We should do this more often.
Yeah, 100%. And just quickly on the players' point, I think more so it's just a couple of those guys are COVID year kids,
Yeah.
and they're also
Yeah.
unique in that they're superstars who don't have a ton of NBA draft prospects. And that doesn't mean that there won't be other guys like that. I'm just like Janai Broom's a National Player of the Year level player who
Yeah.
came back to play a fifth year, which may or may not be a thing in the future. It's like there's a lot of factors that kind of go into getting there. But again, I'm 100% with you. I also would say this, like the 5 years after Mizzou and A&M joined the SEC, the SEC got three bids, five bids, three bids, and five bids. You tell anyone in that period that like the SEC would be the vaunted basketball league of 2025, I think everyone would have looked at you like you were absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
And part of that's resources, and part of that's the brands. I think part of that's just like you went out and said, all right, like Bruce Pearl's available. We got to get Bruce Pearl.
Yeah.
Like the best coach in the country, like you gotta go hire him. Like it's not rocket science. The coaches in the SEC are great, and a lot of them were high level proven dudes before they got to the league. And I think that's how you build in the future.
Yeah, I mean that's the story of not just the SEC, but well documented as well. Why the ACC hasn't been as good. Shockingly, you lose Rick Pitino, Coach K, Roy Williams, Tony Bennett, and Mike Bray, and now Jim Larinaga in a 6-year span. The league's not going to be as good, and whereas the SEC's done a great job of hiring new coaches and bringing them in, the ACC has missed on some of these. And now Pat Kelsey seems to have Louisville going in the right direction now, but still, and I love Micah Shrewsbury at Notre Dame, and he's a guy, if Indiana were to move on from Mike Woodson, that I would want to get that job potentially. But but you've seen, Kenny Payne obviously didn't work. Pittsburgh has had issues before kind of getting solidified with Jeff Capel. Syracuse has struggled. You've seen a lot of these coaches just not work out. Mike Young at Virginia Tech hasn't worked out the way people thought it would. We're still waiting for Wake Forest under Steve Forbes to get that first NCAA tournament appearance, and I don't think this year is going to be the year for that. That with the way they struggled early on in non-con, it's a lot of it is the coaches you bring in. Shocking, right? That the guy that's in charge of putting together the team and making the game plan is important. But in the SEC, they've gotten it right. In the ACC, not so much. And I think that's the big difference between the two leagues right now.
Yeah, and you got at minimum Miami and Virginia looking for coaches in the spring, potentially Florida State, potentially a couple of others. See how they do. And I will say I'll be interested to see. We were actually talking about this last night on After Dark, but I think it's something that I've talked about with some folks in the industry, agents, et cetera. Like, will there be interest from sitting SEC and Big 12 coaches of like, hey, I can either be the hunted in the toughest league in America, or I could go to the ACC. Well, that's pretty good there, man. Like go live in Miami, make $3 million, go hang out, go recruit nationally. Like there's a lot to sell there, and you know, I got to beat up on Cal and NC State instead of Texas A&M and Kentucky and Mississippi State. Like I don't know if I was like Chris Jans at Mississippi State right now, I would be I don't know that it does two jobs necessarily fit him, but I would be sitting there like, I don't know how I'm going to keep this thing up compared to the rest of the league. Like, what if I could get out and get to a place where I'm all of a sudden one of the best coaches in the league? Like that to me would be appealing. So that'll be a storyline to monitor. But if you're the ACC, you got to find a way, whether it's, a proven coach, like Will Wade will get mentioned for a lot of these jobs, whether
Yeah.
it's finding the next riser, right? Like Florida had success with Todd Golden, and I think obviously Alabama with Nate Oates. Like, who are those guys in college basketball right now? It's a good list of them. So, yeah, that you got to find a way to nail these hires and hope Louisville feels like they're in a good place with Kelsey and Shire. I think has solidified things at Duke pretty
Yep.
well. We'll see what the rest of the league does. Big couple
Yep.
years ahead.
Will Wade in Miami just seems like that just seems perfect, right?
It's
That's
a good
just
fit, personality wise. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, it would fit.
Yeah, I do wonder if because the SEC's committed so much financially, the old thing would be, Louisville, Kentucky just went through this with their coaching searches. Well, we could, money whip them because we care about basketball and they don't. Well, the SEC has that money. You're not just gonna, I remember when before Louisville hired Kenny Payne, there was a big push for Louisville to hire Bruce Pearl. And people would say, "Oh, Bruce Pearl would walk here because they're going to give him so much more money that Auburn never get them." What's Auburn paid him now? Like 7 million? And one, the SEC schools have the money to pay. They're willing to do it, and two, they're in better financial states than a lot of these ACC schools are. Also, because they get that television revenue, and that gap keeps on growing. So I think that's going to be the big decision of would you take a little bit even of a pay cut in some places to be able to get that. I think is an interesting discussion as well. What are some other couple things nationally that have really caught your eye as we get into the meat of conference season?
Yeah, I think the top is really, really strong. You can make a case for Duke, Auburn, Iowa State as the best team in the country, and right behind them, knocking on the door is the Houston's, the Floridas, the Tennessees, the Kentuckys. Alabama playing great basketball, starting to surge. Like, I don't think there's one unstoppable team, but I think the top of the sport is as strong as it's been in a while. Um, and I'm excited to see who emerges in some of those next tiers, right? The Big Ten at the top, for instance, like you have Purdue and Illinois and Michigan State and Michigan. We're all playing great basketball right now. All have really, really good point guards.
Yep,
Like,
love Jonas.
yeah, it's
Yep.
awesome. And it's funny to think like 3 years ago, I was texting Jeff Borzella from ESPN about this the other day. Like 3 years ago, I remember there being this whole thing like, man, point guard play across college basketball is really bad. Like, and it was like Gillespie's last year at Villanova. It's like, well, who else could be the Cousy Award winner but Colin Gillespie? Like, there's literally no other option. And now you look around and it's like, all right, like think about all the elite like guards in college. Walter Clayton, the Iowa State duo with Lipsey and Keyshawn Gilbert, Tennessee with Ziegler, Alabama with Sears, Gonzaga with Nembhard, Marquette with Cam Jones, Purdue with Braden Smith, Illinois. Like I'm literally just ripping down Ken Bum,
Yep.
Kasparek shown, Wade Taylor at A&M. Like you go down the list, it is impressive, like the level of guard play throughout college basketball right now. I think that should lend itself to a pretty high level end of the season and end of the full NCAA tournament.
Yeah, and it's going to be great. I think Jack Hepburn's been as good as a lot of those dudes. He really
Absolutely,
has been.
absolutely.
But I love Jonas' game. Wade Taylor has been great. A&M, getting a quad one win, almost beating Alabama, really contending with them without Wade Taylor is one of the crazier things that happened the past week. I would say actually playing offense now to complement the defense that TJO's put in there the last few years I think makes them a real national title Final Four threat. But yeah, Alabama, I love Nate Oates' team, and hopefully Cliff Amorie got banged up in that A&M game. Hopefully he's all right, but I still think they're the team with the highest ceiling. It's not like last year where it was clearly UConn, Purdue that everyone else, or like 2 years ago where yes, UConn went through the swoon as you talked a little bit about it on After Dark last night, but they were the dominant team early. They're the dominant team late. There's a really big group of teams you could convince me could win a national title this year, and I think. And it's not because it's one of those years like a couple years ago, like the 2016 year, for instance, where it was, well, none of these teams are really any good, so that's why anyone can win it. The talent's as good in the sport that I'd argue we've seen probably since 2015 when Duke won with Jahlil Okafor and Kentucky was 38-0 and Wisconsin had Frank Kaminsky, that group. I think this is the most talented year the sport's had since that one which is really good and healthy. I think, going back to a point earlier, NIL and the portals are two really big reasons for that.
Yep, I 100% agree. And yeah, I mean, obviously the COVID year, I think, is also an impact in that.
Yeah.
See what changes long term with eligibility and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, it's been a really fun year, and obviously a lot more to come.
Yeah, a lot more to come indeed, as we still got about 6 weeks before March actually gets here. Going to be a really, really fun conference slate, both for Louisville, the ACC, and nationally as well. Going to be an absolutely banger on a Tuesday night. I was looking, I was like, I think there's 5 games in the 7 o'clock window I would like to be watching at once. So that'll be a fun one, especially while I'm at work. So that'll be great. But Kevin, really, really appreciate the time, man. A lot of fun as always. Again, CBB_Central. You can find him at Sports Illustrated. Um, and for the Field of 68 After Dark podcast as well. Kevin, always appreciate the time, man.
Appreciate it, Jack.
Awesome. We'll be back next time here on Floyd Street's Finest, talking Louisville hoops. They get Syracuse this week coming up on Tuesday, so we'll react to that.